All right, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's about 9 o'clock. I hate to break up all the fellowship, but got a lot to cover. So I hope everybody has had a good morning so far. My name's Aaron. If anyone's visiting, we've been studying in this class this quarter the consequences of sin and what sin is. So we talked a little bit in the previous classes about the origin of sin. Sin originated to the human creation, God's creation. Obviously, humans didn't create it. Mankind, when? Where in the Bible? Genesis chapter 3, all right? Now, who seems to have sinned and fallen before that happened? The angels and Satan, right? And then Satan introduced temptation to Adam and Eve. They didn't listen to what God said, and sin entered the world. So this morning, we're going to be looking at, first of all, does anyone have any questions from last week? We talked about training the conscience, like that last week? Okay. If anyone has any questions about that you want to talk privately, just find me after services. This morning, we're going to talk about sins of the heart. So when we say the heart, and when the Bible uses the heart, what's it referring to? Yeah, it's referring to the mind, all right? When we think of sin, normally, do we think of the thought behind it, or we normally think of what? The action, right? Now, if we think immediately about committing a sin, normally we're thinking about an action, all right? But we know that the Bible talks about sins of the mind, okay, or the heart. So we're going to look at that this morning. The Bible does, of course, put importance on the actions that we do, okay? But it also puts a lot of importance on the mind behind it. I want to look at a few passages to see where those actions start. Normally, people don't just commit a sin that they haven't been thinking about. Normally, whenever we fall into a certain sin, we've been doing what for a while about it? Yeah, normally been thinking about it, okay? So there are sometimes sins that no one knows about except us and God. In the Old Testament, who was sold into slavery by his brothers? All right, Joseph. We'll get a little bit more of the details about why his brothers sold him later, but do you remember in Genesis 39, whenever Potiphar's wife wanted Joseph to commit adultery for her, fornication for him? Do you remember what he said in Genesis 39? He said he didn't want to commit this great sin before who? Before God, right? So even if nobody else knew about it except Joseph and Potiphar's wife, who did Joseph would know about it? God. He knew God would know about it, okay? So some of the things that maybe are in your mind and your heart, maybe nobody knows about them. Maybe you're the only one. Who else knows? God, right? There are a lot of things I think about that I'm like, I shouldn't be thinking about that. Nobody else knows except for me and who? God, all right? So let's start by looking up some passages. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 4 first. Proverbs is one of the 5 books that are classified as what type of literature? Starts with a W. Wisdom literature, that's right. All right. So the book of Proverbs has a lot of principles, okay? Some of the things in Proverbs, a lot of times Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way of his going, when he's older he won't depart from it, okay? It actually means train up a child according to his personality, because we know that sometimes parents do a great job raising children, and what happens? They still fall away, right? What about Adam and Eve? Was God the perfect parent? And what happened to Adam and Eve? That's right. So Proverbs is a book of principles. One of the Proverbs says, if a man's ways please Jehovah, his enemies will always be at peace with him. Does that always hold true? No. We know in the New Testament, Jesus, did his ways please Jehovah God? Yep. And his enemies weren't at peace with him, right? But in Proverbs chapter 4, that's what we're going to look at. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. We're going to look at a few verses that the Bible talks about matters of the heart, how important it is to keep your thoughts. Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. What do you think that means? That's right. So what do we have to be careful about putting into our minds? Yeah, pure things, right? Let's go to Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4. So you've heard the old adage, trash in, trash out, right? If you put bad things in your mind, what's going to come out? Yeah, because what are you doing to your mind when you put bad things in? You're corrupting it, right? I've had people tell me, well, I can listen to all this bad music and it won't affect me. Well, first of all, I know that's not true, because guess what I did at a time when I was unfaithful to church? I listened to bad music, and you know what happened? A lot more bad stuff came out, right? So whenever you put trash in, you can try to deceive yourself and think, well, I can listen to this music, but it's not going to come out in my life. It will come out in your life. Let's look at Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. This is Paul writing to the church in Philippi, and he's closing out the letter. And he says, "Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you." All right? What is this? It's talking about putting into our heart, meditating on those things that are pure, right? Whenever there are some things in life that we come across that you say, well, this might not be right or wrong, this is a verse that I try to think about. Someone says, well, the Bible doesn't say I can't do that. All right, well, if it's a matter of opinion, my next question is, well, does it fit these characteristics, right? Is it something that's going to make me become more like God? I was talking with somebody last week about we were discussing whether they should do something. And for me, and maybe this is a little too much, but I say, well, could you see the Apostle Paul doing that? There's a lot of things when I think about saying something and I think, now would the Apostle Paul say that? And if he wouldn't say it, you know what I try not to do? Not to say it. And I'm not perfect, okay? But we're supposed to put these pure things into our minds so that what comes out? Okay. There's other passages that we could go to. Proverbs 23:7, as he thinketh within himself, so is he. Okay? Let's look at what Jesus said about this. Go in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 12. I think it's, I did, I just don't remember what I said. That's happened more and more as I get older. I think it's 23:7. The first one we looked at was 4:23, but I think 23:7 is, as a man thinketh in his heart. All right, so Matthew chapter 12. Let's look at what Jesus had to say about this. Verses 33 and 35. Matthew chapter 12, verses 33 and 35. Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or else make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For a tree is known by its fruit. Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the what? Heart, the what? Mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. So what does that tell me? Whenever I say something evil, where is it coming from? My heart, right? I know that's been sort of a wake-up call to me sometimes. Whenever maybe I'm a little bit quick-tempered, what does that tell me about my heart? Yeah. Do you think I would react in anger if I didn't have angers? No. And for me, there are times where I get really impatient. Right? You can talk to Tucker, where I'm just like, go, go, go. See how many things I can accomplish at work in one day. And sometimes I'll get a little impatient, and it comes out, right? And that starts where? In my heart. So one thing I have to personally is be aware of that, right? I can't just ignore it. If I ignore it, am I ever going to accomplish solving that problem? No, okay? So we have to be careful and watch in ourselves to see if we can identify those characteristics that we talk about in ourselves, and then we can deal with it. We're still in Matthew. Go to Matthew 15. Matthew 15, verses 17 through 20. In the beginning part of Matthew 15, we hear this section quoted a lot. Who's Jesus dealing with here? Scribes and the Pharisees, right? And what is he? He's calling them hypocrites, and he's saying that they're binding their own doctrines as if they were the commandments of God, okay? But if you go down to verse 17, they've just been questioning about, why don't your disciples wash their hands like we do? Why don't they wash their hands before they eat? Okay. Verse 17, do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. What do you think it means whenever it says, the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart? Verse 19, for out of the heart proceed murders. How would murder proceed out of your heart? Yeah. Do you think somebody's like, I don't like that guy, I think I should murder him? No. What does it normally start? It might start as a dislike, and then you're going to what? Think about it, and it's going to build, it's going to grow. It's like we talked about sin, James, the process, how you have a desire, and that desire is enticed, and you give into it, and it turns to lust, and then when lust conceives, it brings forth what? Death, right? So these things that start in our heart are going to grow. If we don't take care of them, then will lead to actions, all right? Let's go all the way back to Genesis, because I want to look at how important protecting our heart is. Do you guys remember the reason that God wiped out the world with a flood? They were evil. Yeah, that's right. Go to Genesis chapter 6 and verse 5. All right, Genesis chapter 6, and this is where you've had so much wickedness that God decides that He's going to destroy the earth and start again with Noah and his family. And it's not just their actions. Their actions were wicked, but look at what verse 5, Genesis chapter 6 and verse 5 says. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and what's the next part? That every intent of the what? Thoughts of his heart, thoughts of his imagination, okay, was only evil continually. Can you imagine how evil that world must have been? You think about their long lives. How long do you think, let's say you live 70 years, right, 80 years, 90 years, and you just keep getting more and more evil. How evil do you think those people would have been if they lived for hundreds of years? Kept getting more and more evil, right? But God, one of the reasons God destroys the earth with a flood is because people's actions were wicked, but also their what? Their thoughts, okay? So let's look at a few of those this morning. We're going to talk this morning, first we're going to look about jealousy and envy, okay? Can you think of any stories? I kind of alluded to one earlier in Genesis. Can you think of any Bible stories? What comes to your mind when I mention jealousy or envy? That's right. In the book of Genesis, you had Joseph's brothers, okay? What were they envious of? The coat of many colors? That's right. And he was given that coat of many colors because his dad what? His dad liked him best, right? And so his brothers were envious, they were jealous, and that led them to do what to Joseph? Yeah, what were they going to do? They were going to kill him. And then one of the brothers said, let's sell him into slavery, right? Okay, now we see how God's providence works out. What are some other Old Testament stories? What about all the way back in Genesis chapter 4? Cain and Abel, right? God said in Genesis 4 they were supposed to bring an offering to God. Abel brought one that was pleasing to God. Cain brought one that was not accepted. And then what happened? Cain was jealousy. And what did that jealousy lead to? Yeah, that murder didn't just start with, we're out in the field. I don't know what else I'm going to do today. It started with him being jealous, angry at his brother, and that led to his action, right? So where his murder came from, it started in his heart. What about some kings? Go ahead. Yeah. What about some kings? She beat me to it. Saul and David, right? In the Old Testament, what was Saul's problem with David? That's right. Saul's killed his thousands, but David's killed his 10,000s, right? Saul was jealous of the attention that David was getting. And that ultimately led him to try to do what to David on multiple occasions? To kill him. And then you look at David, all right, now look at the condition of Saul's heart. Now, David had his shortcomings, we know that, okay? But what about whenever David was in the cave and Saul was in there? Do you remember what David could have done? That's right. Saul is relieving himself in a cave, and David's in the cave, and David sneaks up and cuts off the edge of his garment and then backs off and basically says, hey, look what I could have done. But he wouldn't kill Saul because he said he wouldn't touch God's what? Anointed, right? Look at the difference in the heart conditions. Maybe that's why the Bible says that David was a man after God's own heart, right? Now that was said before he committed sin with Bathsheba, so that's not saying anything. When you see David was a man after God's own heart, and the sin he committed, you have to remember this is not referencing the time when he was doing that sin. Okay. What about the reason? What was the reason that Jesus was delivered over to Pilate? Go to Matthew 27. Matthew 27, I believe it's verse 18. Okay, Matthew chapter 27, and let's start in verse 15, actually. This is talking about Jesus taking the place of Barabbas, okay? Matthew 27, start in verse 15. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? Verse 18, for he, Pilate, he knew that they had handed him, Jesus, over because of what? Envy. Why were they envious of Jesus? Yeah. Yeah, the Pharisees like to be praised by men. They like to, receive the best seats at dinners, and then all of a sudden you have this guy come along who's teaching with authority, and he's healing people. These multitudes of people follow him, and their attitude is we should do what? Kill him. I think in John 11, Caiaphas said it'd be better for one man to die for the nation. He didn't realize what he was prophesying. He's basically saying it would be better for one man to die for their purposes, but in actuality, Jesus was dying for not only the whole nation, but the whole world, right? Contrast that with a different person's attitude. Who prepared the way for Jesus? John the Baptist, all right? What happened whenever, John the Baptist was a popular guy. All the people, it says in Jerusalem, Judea, and the whole region around the Jordan, that's a lot of people, were coming to be baptized by John the Baptist, right? He was popular, okay? And then Jesus comes along, and John the Baptist is not jealous of Jesus. What did John the Baptist say about Jesus? That's right. I must decrease and he must increase, okay? Did John the Baptist have a heart problem? No. That's how the rest of the Jews really should have responded, but it's not how they did. Let's look at a couple passages in the New Testament that talk about jealousy or envy. Go to Romans chapter 1. And if anyone has any questions or comments, just raise your hand. All right, so in Romans chapter 1, the point of the Roman letter, we said, is that Paul's trying to explain to them, look, it's not by works of the law of Moses, right? It's by the faith in Christ, the gospel, all right? And in chapter 1, he's basically saying in verse 20 how everyone can look at what's created and see that there's a what? There's God, okay? And then he says basically they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, worshipped and served instead of God, the Creator, their own selves, the creation. And then he goes through this list of sins. And if you notice in verse 24, it says all these sins before it. Verse 24, God gave them up. Verse 26, for this reason God gave them up. And then in verse 28, God gave them over to a debased mind. So they committed this sin, God allowed it to get worse. They committed more sins, God allows it. God will allow you to go the direction you want to go, okay? But there'll be consequences. But go down and look in verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness. And then he's going to talk about some things that are unrighteous. With all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. In verse 29, are those some pretty serious sins? Yeah, and guess what's right in there with it? envy, right? Covetousness, you look at that in the Old Testament, that's really the same thing as jealousy, right? Desiring something. So you see there's a lot of passages that deal with it. In Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 21, you've got jealousy and envy in there. And verse 19, I think, is jealousy, and envy is maybe in 21 or 20 and 21. In Exodus 20 and verse 17, the Ten Commandments, we just mentioned that, you're not supposed to what? Covet. Exodus 20:17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. What are some ways to deal with jealousy? What's jealousy arise from? Let's say that let's say you're on Instagram or you're on Facebook and you just look at all these other like rich exotic cars and houses and yachts and all this. What's that going to start making you think about your life? If you have the wrong perspective. I don't have that. Why don't I get that? That's not fair. Why can't I have it, right? I've heard people say that comparison is the thief of joy, right? Depends your attitude and what you're comparing it to, right? If you look at other things and you're thankful for what you have, then what could it also bring? Yeah, if we're thankful, you know. I think about, I don't want to talk about this for too long, but some of the times I got to go to Africa, I remember one time this guy, I had never really been that thankful for transportation, and this man walked up to me once at a place we were at, and he said, Brother Aaron, how far do you have to walk to your church building? This guy walked like 5 miles to get to Sunday morning services, right? Sometimes people say, why don't they have Sunday evening services in Africa sometimes? Some of these people walk 5-10 miles. It takes them 3 or 4 hours to get there. So he asked me how far I had to walk to services. Do you know what I said? Not as far as you, brother. Because you know how far I have to walk? Yeah, about 50 yards. And this guy walked 4 or 5 miles. Now, how lucky are we to live in America, right? Almost all of us have multiple cars. You know, we could have whatever car we wanted, right? What about our houses? There was another guy in Africa. The very first trip I went, he had a suit. All the preachers over there, even throughout their day, normally wear shirts and ties, okay? And they just do that. They don't think that it's wrong not to. They just think, hey, this gives us a way to look nice for the people around us. And this one guy said, brother, I must show you my house. I built it myself. And he has a shirt and tie on. So we walked about 2 miles, probably, I don't know, maybe took an hour to get to his house. And when we got to his house, he was so proud of. Do you know what it was? It was a 2-room mud hut that he built with himself. He built by himself. And he was so proud of it because he worked hard for it, right? We're pretty lucky with the things we get to live in this country with. Yeah. So sometimes when we start to get jealous of somebody else, maybe we should say, hey, look at all the things that we do have, right? All right, let's look at a different sin. Any comments, questions about jealousy, envy? Any Bible passages that maybe come to your mind that we didn't hit on? Dwayne. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we look at some of these and we say, well, I haven't murdered, I don't do this, I don't do that. There's something, your sin is listed in those 4 verses.
It sure is, yeah. I know if I read all those verses, there's lots of things I'd be guilty of in there. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. I mean, you think about sexual sins, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. Where did Jesus say in Matthew 5:27 and 28 they start? Yeah, he said, if you look at a woman to lust after her, you've committed adultery with her already where? In your heart. He said, basically, if you've been said not to murder, but I say if you look at your brother with what? Hatred in your heart, what? Yeah. Jesus is saying, look, Jesus is not saying if I look at a woman to lust, that is fornication, adultery, according to Matthew 19:9, she can put me away, right? It's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that fornication and adultery will never start, that will never happen if it doesn't start where? In your heart, right? So, men and women, if you want to avoid those sins, what do you have to start taking care of right now? That's right. That's right. Okay. Good thoughts. Anyone else? All right, let's look at anger, okay? Is anger always wrong? No? Was Jesus angry? You think he was angry when he's making that whip of bulrushes, is that what it was, to drive out the money changers? I bet he was angry. I can't remember where I read this, but somewhere said that the word used is like he was basically huffing his nose. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's something, the word in Greek. You can try to find that on your own because I didn't look that up this morning. But Jesus was angry, but he was angry for a righteous reason, right? God is angry for righteous reasons. Ephesians 4:26, I think it is, says that we can what? Be angry and what? Not sin, all right? But there are some types of anger that are unrighteous. Let's look at a couple of passages. I'll be honest with you. I don't know that I'd say I guess I do deal with anger. I'm not going to dress it up. There are times where things make me angry that shouldn't make me angry. I'll just be honest with you. And so these are verses that kind of hit home. If I can get some different people to look up some verses, let's look at Ecclesiastes 7:9. Ecclesiastes 7:9. Someone else, Proverbs 14:17. Someone else, another passage in Proverbs, Proverbs 22:24. And another Proverbs passage, Proverbs 29:22. Mm-hmm. God is jealous, that's right. That's right. And it's funny, if you look up the definition for jealousy, kind of depends, because there's one definition that means of jealousy that's normally at the bottom of your dictionaries that say they have a desire for the best of somebody, right? So there's a good jealousy and a bad jealousy, that's right. Some people try to say, well, the Bible says God's jealous. Yeah, the Bible does say God is jealous, but you have to determine, based on the context, what type of jealousy that is. Okay, Ecclesiastes 7:9. How does that make me feel when I read it? If I know that sometimes I get angry over things. Anger rests in the bosom of what? Fools. What's that mean if I'm acting anger? What does that make me sometime? A fool, right? If I don't identify it and try to correct it. Okay? What about Proverbs 14:17? All right, so a quick-tempered man acts foolishly. What does that mean I should try to have? Have patience, right? Or else what might I do? Act foolishly. My dad taught me growing up, he said, do not make a decision right off the bat, because what's normally going to happen? I'll tell you a story. Once I lived in a townhouse complex in Raleigh, and in front of my townhouse there was a public street. Well, I had my car that was parked over across. I had two cars at the time, and I had a car parked across in front of someone else's townhouse, right? Public street. And I got a police officer knocking on my door one day. And I went and opened the door, and he came to tell me, sir, you need to move your vehicle. And I said, why do I need to move my vehicle? And he said, well, it's in front of this lady's townhouse. And I said, is that not a public street? And he said, yes, it is. And I said, okay, all right, thank you for letting me know. So he leaves. I had about a 1.5-page email typed up to this lady, and man, I was about to let her have it, right? The one who called the police on me to move my legally parked car on a public street. And you know what I decided was probably better to do? Delete it, And you know how thankful I am every time I think about that story? I'd have been so embarrassed. And if I would have reacted that way, quick-tempered, in anger, do you think I'd ever been able to be a good influence on that woman? No. So I slept on it, which is what my dad always taught me to do. Sleep on it, you'll make a better decision the next day. Next day I didn't send the email, moved my car, and everything was fine, right? So a quick-tempered man acts foolishly. So we got to try to be patient. Each of us got to be more patient. I got to take that one as much as anybody. What about Proverbs 22:24? Yes. Yeah. Technically, there was nothing wrong with my car being parked there. The way I was about to respond was a bigger issue. Yeah. All right. Proverbs 22:24. So the Proverbs writer says, hey, if Aaron's angry, should you be buddies with him? No. Why? It's going to affect you, right? So if I'm an angry person and I can't control it and I'm not recognizing it, do you really want to be hanging around me that much? No. That's right. It'll rub off on you. So we need to be careful, find those things. If anger is something we struggle with, we need to work on it. All right? Yes, sir. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? It'd be very easy if anger is something we deal with to say like that, oh, I don't really deal with anger, right? Sometimes we can deceive ourselves into thinking we don't have a problem with something that we really do, right? That's a great. Proverbs 29:22. An angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression. That's one of the words we studied at the beginning, transgression, sin, iniquity, right? A furious man abounds in transgression. Why do you think that is? Yeah. 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 Yeah, she's right. She said there's medical evidence. You can go look it up that whenever you get angry, your body starts producing chemicals that don't make you think straight, right? I know of that from personal experience. There's times where, when Jamie and I will get into discussions and I'll say something and later I'm thinking, what did we even argue about? You know? I remember one time in Raleigh I was supposed to ask somebody something and I forgot. And it was like over the most trivial thing and I got irritated. And looking back, it's like, why in the world would I get irritated at that, right? And that shows that I had a problem where? In my heart, right? Okay. We said not all anger is wrong. What is one of the fruits of the Spirit that we need to work on if we have a problem with anger? What kind of control? Self-control. That's right. Look up Proverbs 16:32. I like this verse. Because every guy, you think about a king or a mighty, you think what's manly? Like a warrior, right? Someone's like you can conquer in battle. You think back to David in the Old Testament and how he just killed his 10,000s, okay? Look at Proverbs 16:32. Proverbs 16:32. He who is slow to anger is better than what? The mighty. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit, better is what it's meaning. It doesn't say that in the New King James. He who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. So he says, you want to be mighty? You want to take a city? You want to be this big, powerful warlord, conqueror? What's better than that? Someone that what? Slow to anger and rules his spirit. Someone that has self-control. Right? It's pretty cool, isn't it? God thinks this guy can conquer a whole city. You know it's better than that? Somebody that's slow to anger. Someone that has self-control, can control a spirit. Titus 1:8 talks about how elders are supposed to be self-controlled. But then if you keep reading in Titus chapter 2 and verse 11, it says the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us. And then in that list of things it talks about, one of those is guess what? Self-controlled, right? So all Christians are supposed to be self-controlled. If we're still in Proverbs, somebody look up Proverbs 29:11. We're talking about self-control. And if you struggle with anger, Proverbs 29:11. A fool vents all his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. Sometimes you may have, the whole idea of be angry and sin not. Sometimes you may have these feelings that you want to what? Vent. What do we always say? Like, man, I just got to vent. We say that? I just got to vent to you. Sometimes we might need to, but what does the Bible say sometimes we shouldn't do? Sometimes we don't need to vent. If it's something we're going to say that's sinful, something we shouldn't be saying, then we need to try to take it and just let it go. Right? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. In grad school, one of my professors on counseling said he has people write it down on a piece of paper and throw it away, right? Or tear it up. He'll say, write down on a piece of paper all the things you want to say and then tear it up. It's kind of like the one example. Don't think Aaron always does this. Aaron vents when he shouldn't sometimes, but of writing that email to the lady and then deleting it. It made me feel a whole lot better. I think sent it to one of my friends, so I'd say, hey, I want you to read this. So he knew how much I could have, And then we deleted it, right? But yes. Mm-hmm. That's right. Let's go to James real quick. It's a great point. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you could say. I read this in a book once. It was talking about the marriage relationship, husband and wife, and it compared it to a flower, right? The wife being the flower with like her feelings, okay? With a flower, you can take care of that thing for months and years, right? And it will become beautiful, right? How fast can you destroy that flower? Like that, right? One big swipe, what would happen? We got to be careful in our marriages and our friendships. I could spend years cultivating trust in somebody, and I could ruin it in what? Like that. I could say one thing that maybe I could repent of, but what's it still going to... Are they going to be able to completely forget about it? No. I mean, I can think of things that have been said to me years ago that I still think of, right? The person asked for forgiveness, it's behind us. But there are things, and I've said things the same way. So the tongue is, what does it say? It sets a forest ablaze. Yeah. James chapter 4. Next week we're going to get into pride. I don't think we're going to have time to do that this morning. But look at James chapter 4 and verse 6. He's talked a lot in chapter 3 about the untamable tongue. And then he talks about pride. Actually, let's just read. Why not? We're talking about the tongue. Let's go to chapter 3 instead of 4. Look at verse 4. Look at the ships. Although they are so large and driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles, and the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body, and sets on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire by hell. Every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed, and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and we curse men, who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceeds blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Then verse 11, does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? And then in verse 12, it's a similar story. He's basically saying, these things that you say, they come from where? And they can do some real damage when they come out, right? In the minute or two we have, we're going to pick up with pride next week. But let me give you a verse or two, maybe if you're thinking, okay, how can we do this? Number one, whenever David sinned, Psalm 51:10, he said to God, create in me a clean heart, O God, renew a right spirit within me. He did what? What's the word? Repented. He had repentance, all right? James 4:7-10, draw near to God. Therefore submit to God, resist the devil, he will flee from you. Draw near to God, he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. So he says, you committed this action, cleanse your hands, but also purify your what? But he means your mind, right? Purify that. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. And we talked about meditating on pure things, and then eliminate temptations. Jesus, right after that passage about if you look on a woman to lust, you've committed adultery in your heart, then he basically says, if you have an eye that causes you to sin, what? Pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, right? He's not literally saying that we need to do those things. He's saying you need to take aggressive action to eliminate anything that's tempting you, right? So if you have something that tempts you with jealousy or covetousness, maybe it's Instagram, looking at all the big houses, you got to do what? If it's a problem for you, if it's causing you to covet or to be jealous or envy, same thing with other things you might desire. If you look at something so much to where you can't quit thinking about that thing, then you probably need to do what? Oh, yeah. I was watching one of the Facebook Connect. Denny Petrillo was doing a teaching on Ecclesiastes, and he made some quote about if you have anything other than dirt floors, if you don't have a dirt floor, if you have concrete floor, cement floor, anything else, you're like in the top maybe 3% in the world of wealth. So I'm sure everyone in here is in the top 3%, probably higher. So thanks for your attention, and we'll pick up with pride next week.